He was a billionaire widower who had everything, except the strength to calm his crying baby. Night after night, he stood helpless, his heart breaking as his little girl wept in his arms. Then one evening, there was a knock at the door. A young woman named Catalina stood there, kind, gentle, and with a heart full of love. She didn't just help his baby, she healed his soul. What started as an act of compassion soon turned into something far deeper. A story of two broken hearts finding light again. This is not just a story about love. It's about healing, forgiveness, and how sometimes the right person enters your life exactly when you've lost all hope. The grand mansion stood silent under the pale moonlight, a place that once echoed with laughter and love, now filled only with echoes of grief. Inside, Walter Grant, a 35-year-old billionaire, sat slumped on the edge of a rocking chair, his shirt untucked, eyes red from sleepless nights. In his trembling arms lay his tiny baby girl, Emma, crying with such sadness that it tore the air like glass breaking in the night. Every sob from her tiny lips stabbed his chest with guilt and helplessness. "Please, baby girl, drink," he whispered, holding a small bottle of milk that she refused to touch. Her face turned red, her cries louder, desperate, aching, hungry. Walter's eyes filled with tears as he stared at the bottle that had gone cold again. 2 months ago, his world had been perfect. His wife, Grace, had been his everything, soft-spoken, kind, his strength in every storm. But childbirth had stolen her from him, leaving only a photo on the mantel and a baby who looked exactly like her. Now every time he looked at Emma's little face, his heart broke all over again. He had all the money in the world, cars, staff, security, but he couldn't feed his own baby. He'd hired nurses, but they left, saying the baby refused them all. Even the last housekeeper had quit that morning, murmuring she couldn't take the sound of constant crying anymore. Now it was just him and Emma, a billionaire and his crying daughter in a mansion too big for the both of them. Walter walked the hallway, cradling Emma against his chest. "I'm trying, sweetheart. Daddy's trying." His voice cracked. "Please don't cry, please." But the baby only screamed harder, her tiny fists waving in the air. He sank to the marble floor, his back against the wall, clutching her close, tears streaming down his cheeks. He remembered the night Grace had died. Her last words were, "Promise me you'll never let her cry alone." And now here he was, breaking that promise night after night. He looked up at the ceiling, whispering brokenly, "Grace, what do I do without you? She needs you. I need you." The clock ticked past midnight. The baby's cries echoed through the empty rooms like haunting music. Walter's head fell back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. The mansion felt colder than ever, not because of the night air, but because love had left it. Just as his eyes began to blur with tears, a faint sound broke the silence. A knock. He froze. It was soft at first, almost unsure, then came again, firmer this time. Walter frowned, glancing toward the massive front doors. Who would come to his mansion at this hour? He looked down at Emma, still crying, her face red, her tiny fingers clutching his shirt. He hesitated, fear and confusion mixing in his chest. Could it be one of the old staff? Or someone in trouble? The knock came again, steady, gentle, like someone who knew what they were doing. Walter slowly stood, cradling Emma close, his heart thudding. He walked through the quiet hallway, past portraits and chandeliers, toward the door that had stayed locked since Grace's death. When he opened it, a gust of cool night air rushed in, and there she was. A young woman, pale from exhaustion yet glowing under the porch light. Her hair was loose, her eyes filled with concern, and in her arms she held a folded blanket. "Sir," she said softly, her voice trembling but kind. "I'm sorry for coming so late. I heard the baby crying. I couldn't ignore it." For a moment, Walter just stared, silent, confused, desperate. She looked like a stranger from another world, yet there was something calm about her presence. The baby's cries softened slightly in his arms, as if sensing the warmth in this woman's voice. Walter's throat tightened. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The woman smiled gently, though her eyes glistened with sadness. "My name's Catalina Reed," she whispered. "I live nearby. I'm a nurse, and I think I can help." Walter blinked, lost between suspicion and hope. "Help? How?" Catalina hesitated, her eyes lowering for a second as she held the blanket tighter. Her next words would change his life forever. The night air brushed against Walter's face as he stared at the woman on his doorstep. Her presence felt strange, unexpected, but not threatening. She wasn't dressed fancy, just a long cardigan and worn jeans, her hair a little messy from the wind. But her eyes, they were kind, calm. The kind of eyes that made broken hearts feel seen. "I heard your baby crying," Catalina said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I couldn't just stay home. I had to come." Walter tightened his hold on baby Emma. "You shouldn't be here this late," he said, trying to sound firm, but his voice cracked from exhaustion. Catalina's lips trembled. "I know, sir, but your little one sounds hungry. I think I can help." Walter frowned. "Help? You don't even know us." Catalina nodded gently, her eyes glistening. "Maybe not, but I know that sound, the sound of a hungry baby crying." Something in her voice, something soft yet deeply broken, made Walter pause. She took a step closer, holding her blanket tighter to her chest. "I used to be a nurse," she said, her words quiet as confession. "And I recently lost my baby." Walter's breath caught. He looked at her, seeing for the first time the pain hiding behind her calmness. She continued, her voice trembling. "My baby didn't survive, but I still have milk. I can feed her if you'll let me." The world seemed to go still. Even Emma's crying slowed, as if she too sensed what was happening. Walter's eyes widened in shock. "You mean—" Catalina nodded. "Yes, I can breastfeed her. She's starving. Please, let me help her." For a moment, Walter couldn't speak. His chest felt heavy, his throat tight. He looked at this stranger who stood before him, offering kindness in its purest form. It wasn't pity in her eyes, it was something deeper. Compassion, humanity, love that expected nothing in return. He looked at Emma, whose tiny face was now buried against his shirt, still whimpering softly. His heart ached at the thought of refusing. He had tried everything, every nurse, every formula, and this woman, this stranger, was standing here with tears in her eyes, begging to help his child. Finally, he whispered, voice trembling, "Please, come in." Catalina stepped inside, and the warmth of the mansion wrapped around her like a secret she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. She looked around, her eyes sweeping over the portraits of Walter's late wife, the baby toys scattered across the marble floor, the untouched bottles on the table. Every inch of the house screamed loneliness. Walter guided her to the couch. "She won't take a bottle. I don't know what else to do," he murmured. Catalina nodded softly. "It's all right. Babies know when milk is real, when comfort is real." She sat down, gently unwrapping the blanket she carried. Walter turned his gaze away respectfully, his heart pounding, unsure of where to look or how to breathe. Catalina whispered sweetly to Emma, her voice like a lullaby. "Shh, little one, you're safe now. Mama's here." And just like that, Emma's cries stopped. She began to feed, her tiny hands clutching Catalina's shirt. Walter watched, frozen in disbelief, tears welling in his eyes. The silence that filled the room wasn't empty. It was peaceful, sacred. The only sound was the soft breathing of a baby finally comforted after endless hours of hunger. Walter sank to his knees before them, his voice breaking. "You're an angel," he whispered. "You saved her." Catalina shook her head gently. "No, she saved me." For a long moment they said nothing, just looked at each other, two souls scarred by loss but finding healing in a shared silence. The weight of grief seemed to lift slightly from Walter's chest. For the first time since his wife's death, the mansion didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like life had stepped inside again. He made tea for her after Emma fell asleep, his hands still shaking slightly as he handed her the cup. Catalina smiled softly, her fingers brushing his by accident, a small touch that sent a jolt of warmth through him. Neither of them spoke about it, but both felt it, something new and fragile awakening in the quiet night. When she stood to leave, Walter's heart tightened. "Please, stay for tonight," he whispered. "Emma sleeps better with you here." Catalina hesitated, torn between her sense of right and the pull in her heart. Finally, she nodded. "All right, just tonight." As she followed him to the guest room, the baby peacefully sleeping in her arms, Walter couldn't help but glance back. The hallway lights glowed softly against her hair, and for a moment it felt as if the universe had sent Grace's soul back, not to replace, but to heal. Walter closed his eyes and whispered to himself, maybe this was meant to happen. And somewhere in the stillness of midnight, as Catalina laid Emma in her crib, the mansion that once held nothing but pain began to breathe again, with hope, warmth, and the faintest spark of love. The next morning arrived quietly, with sunlight slipping through the mansion's tall windows like shy visitors. Walter woke up for the first time in weeks without hearing the sound of crying. For a moment he panicked, until he heard something else instead. A soft hum, a gentle woman's voice singing a lullaby. He followed the sound to the living room, where his world seemed to stop. Catalina sat on the couch in the golden light, baby Emma cradled in her arms. Her voice flowed through the room like sunlight, warm, healing, alive. Emma's little eyes blinked sleepily, then closed again, resting peacefully against Catalina's chest. Walter stood there quietly, his heart melting in his chest. He hadn't seen his daughter this calm, this safe, since the day Grace died. Something about Catalina's touch, her patience, her quiet strength, it filled the house with life again. He took a step closer. "She likes you," he said softly. Catalina smiled, her eyes glimmering like dew. "Babies feel hearts, not faces. She feels your love too." Walter swallowed hard, unable to explain the ache in his chest. He hadn't smiled in weeks. But now, seeing them together, a faint one appeared, uncertain but real. Catalina looked around the room, at the untouched breakfast tray, the wilted flowers, the dusty corners. "You've been trying to do everything alone, haven't you?" she asked softly. Walter nodded. "I thought I had to. I thought needing help made me weak." Catalina looked up at him, her voice gentle yet firm. "It doesn't make you weak, Walter. It makes you human." Her words sank deep, like sunlight melting frozen ground. Over the next few hours, Catalina stayed, feeding Emma, washing small baby clothes, and softly humming as she worked. Walter watched from a distance, feeling something shift inside him, a feeling he'd long buried under pain. She wasn't just caring for his child, she was breathing warmth back into every cold corner of his soul. He found himself wanting to know her story. During lunch, he asked, "You said you lost your baby. I'm sorry, that must have been hard." Catalina looked down, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "It was. She lived only 2 days. I named her Hope." Her voice broke. "When she died, I thought my heart had too. But hearing your baby cry that night, something inside me couldn't stay still." Walter's eyes softened. "Maybe Hope wanted you to save another child." Tears shimmered in Catalina's lashes. Maybe she did. Silence filled the room, not empty, but comforting. Walter felt closer to her than he had to anyone in months. It wasn't attraction. It was connection. Two broken souls who somehow fit together in their shared pain. That evening, as Catalina prepared to leave, Emma began to fuss again. Walter tried to calm her, but she stretched her tiny arms toward Catalina, whimpering softly. Catalina smiled, her heart swelling. "Looks like she wants me to stay a bit longer." Walter hesitated, torn between manners and the fear of being alone again. Then he said quietly, "Stay for dinner. I haven't had company in a long time." She agreed with a small nod. They ate simply, nothing fancy, just warm soup and bread. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was gentle, healing. Now and then their eyes met, and each time it did, Walter's heart beat faster than before. After dinner, Catalina rocked Emma to sleep by the fireplace. The orange glow painted her face in soft gold, and Walter found himself watching her quietly. Something about her made him believe in warmth again, in goodness, in second chances. When Emma finally drifted to sleep, Catalina looked up to find Walter still watching her. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the world grew still. No words, no plans, just a quiet connection stronger than either could explain. "Thank you," Walter whispered, "for saving her, for saving me." Catalina smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks. Maybe I needed saving too." The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't lonely. It was full of unspoken things, tenderness, gratitude, and something new slowly blooming between them. Something neither of them dared to name yet. When Catalina finally stood to leave, Walter felt the weight of the empty house pressing against his heart again. He didn't want her to go, not tonight, not ever. But all he said was, "Drive safe." She smiled softly, walking toward the door, but before stepping out, she turned back. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'll come tomorrow if you want." Walter's eyes glistened. "Please do." The door closed behind her, and for the first time since his wife's passing, Walter realized the mansion didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like something precious had walked in with her and left a piece of its light behind. The days that followed felt like a dream Walter didn't want to wake up from. The mansion, once heavy with silence and shadows, began to breathe again. Where there had been echoes, now there was laughter. Soft baby giggles, gentle footsteps, and Catalina's warm voice humming through the halls. Catalina had promised to come, just for a few days. But a few days turned into a week, then 2. Each morning she arrived early, carrying fresh milk, soft blankets, and a smile that could light even the darkest room. Walter tried to tell himself she was only helping, for Emma's sake. But deep down he knew it was more. Every time she entered the mansion, it felt like hope walking through the door. One morning, Walter walked downstairs and stopped mid-step. Catalina was sitting on the rug, playing peekaboo with Emma. The baby's laughter filled the air, sweet, innocent, and full of joy. Walter stood there for a long time, watching. That sound, his daughter's laughter, was something he thought he'd never hear again. He felt something warm rise in his chest, something dangerously close to happiness. Catalina looked up, catching him watching. Her cheeks turned pink. "Good morning, Mr. Grant." He smiled shyly. "I told you to call me Walter." She laughed softly. "Old habits. You look more like a Walter than a Sir anyway." They shared a smile that lingered longer than it should have. Every day after that, it grew harder to ignore the spark quietly building between them. Catalina cooked small meals, nothing fancy, soup, pancakes, simple dinners, but they tasted better than any chef's dish he'd ever had. Walter would join her in the kitchen, helping cut vegetables or pour coffee. He wasn't used to company, but with her it felt natural, easy. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in gold and pink, they sat on the porch, watching Emma sleep in her stroller. Catalina sighed. "It's beautiful here, peaceful. You'd never think this house once felt so empty." Walter looked at her, his voice low. "It was empty, until you came." She turned her head quickly, pretending to focus on the horizon, but her cheeks flushed a soft red. Her heart skipped, but she said nothing. Later that night, while feeding Emma, Catalina found herself studying Walter. The way he gently brushed Emma's hair aside, the softness in his eyes when he looked at his daughter. He wasn't the cold billionaire she imagined. He was a broken man learning to love again. But behind his calm face, Walter fought his own storm. Every time he looked at Catalina, guilt whispered inside him, "Grace. How can I feel again when I promised you my heart forever?" He'd stare at Grace's photo on the mantel and whisper, "I don't want to forget you. But she makes the pain fade, and I don't know if that's wrong." He didn't know Catalina heard him one night. She'd stopped in the hallway holding Emma's blanket, her heart twisting. She understood his grief because she carried her own. And that's when she realized she was falling in love with a man still haunted by the woman he lost. The next morning, Walter found her quiet, distant. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked softly. Catalina's eyes filled with tears. "I should. You're healing, and I don't want to take her place." Walter stepped closer, his voice rough. "No one could take her place. But you've given my daughter a mother's warmth again. You've given me a reason to wake up." Catalina's tears spilled over, her lips trembling. "Walter," But before she could speak, Emma started crying upstairs and Catalina rushed to her. Walter watched her go, realizing just how deeply he needed her, not just as a caretaker, but as the heart his home had been missing. That evening, as Catalina packed her small bag, Walter stood by the window, torn. He knew she wanted to leave to protect her heart, but he also knew he couldn't let her walk out of his life. He was about to go to her when Emma suddenly began to cough, her small body shaking. Catalina's bag fell to the floor as she screamed, "Walter, she's burning up!" And in that terrifying moment, all their emotions, all their fears and hidden love came rushing to the surface. Emma's cries returned, this time different, weaker. Her tiny face burned with fever. Walter panicked, his heart racing. "Catalina, she's not breathing right." Catalina rushed to the crib, checking her pulse and breathing. "We need to cool her down. Get me a wet cloth." For hours they worked together, fighting fear, praying silently. Walter couldn't bear to lose another loved one. Catalina never left Emma's side, whispering comforting words, her tears mixing with the baby's sweat. Finally, after what felt like forever, the baby's fever began to drop. Emma sighed softly, falling asleep in Catalina's arms. Walter collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. Catalina came to him, touching his shoulder. "She'll be okay." He looked up, eyes red. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Catalina's breath caught. "Don't say that, Walter." But he stood, his voice trembling. "I mean it. You came here when I was drowning. You saved my daughter. You saved me." Tears filled her eyes. "And you gave me back my reason to live." In the silence that followed, he cupped her face gently. "Catalina." She closed her eyes, whispering, "Walter." And that night, in the quiet of that mansion, grief met healing and love was born from loss. Months passed. Catalina never left. What began as an act of kindness became a bond deeper than either expected. Walter proposed not with grandeur, but with tears in his eyes and Emma in his arms. "I thought my heart had died with Grace," he said softly, "but you showed me it can love again, not instead, but anew." Catalina wept as she whispered, "You gave me back the family I lost." They married quietly in the mansion garden, surrounded by the people who once worked for him, and who returned after hearing laughter again echoing through the halls. Walter often told friends that night changed everything. "Sometimes," he said, "the people who heal you are the ones who knock when the world has gone silent." Lesson. This story isn't just about love, it's about compassion. In a society often divided by wealth, grief, and isolation, Catalina's simple act of kindness reminded everyone that humanity still matters. Love doesn't care about money, titles, or sorrow. It grows wherever hearts are brave enough to care. And as baby Emma laughed in her new mother's arms, the mansion that once echoed with cries now sang with life, love, and hope again.